Hi, this video is to help you understand how to use the concept of elasticity in creating a customer profile in the strategy simulation. And the first thing you have to understand is what what elasticity means in an economic sense. And in this case, elasticity means sensitivity. And so when one does an elasticity analysis, what they're doing is they're testing how sensitive are customers or suppliers to a change in the market. Now, think about the changes that could happen. Well, there could be changes in consumers' income. There could be a change in the price of the good. There could be a change in advertising. There could be a change in the quality of the ingredients. All of the things I mentioned are determinants of demand. In other words, there are many things that determine how much a customer is willing and able to demand. Price, for example, is one very important determinant of demand, but it's not the only one. When you calculate demand elasticities, you're calculating the sensitivity the customer has to a change in a determinant of demand. And the sensitivity will be measured by the change in demand, quantity demanded. So let's take a very important elasticity, price elasticity. And there is a formula to calculate price elasticity. So in other words, when you change price, we know that, for example, if you change price up, increase price, demand will fall. But what price elasticity will tell you is how far it will fall. When you lower price, we know demand will go up, but by how far will it go up? And that's what price elasticity will tell us. And so when you calculate it, you're going to get a number. You're going to get a number that's negative because there's an inverse relationship between price and quantity demanded. So when one goes up, the other goes down. But what most people do is they simply look at the absolute value of it. And so when you're looking at the absolute value, any number that is greater than 1, that means the customer is relatively sensitive to a change of price. Any number that is less than 1, the customer is relatively insensitive. And what we say is they're elastic, price elastic if they're sensitive, they're price inelastic if they're insensitive. So what's the formula here? Well, the formula is it takes the percentage change in quantity demanded and divides it by the percentage change in price. Now, there's a couple of ways of calculating this, and we're going to use something called the midpoint or arc elasticity, and that looks at the simple change in quantity over the average quantity, and that is divided by the simple change in price over the average price. It looks like this in a formula right here, and that's what you see here. The simple change in quantity divided by the average quantity, and this number is divided by the simple change in price over the average price. Now let's use this formula, and we're going to be evaluating the value of E. So what if our P1, so you see this how we have a P1 and a P2, a Q1 and a Q2. Let's say our P1 is 35 cents and our Q1 is 6. Our P2 is 30 cents. Our Q2 is 8. So what is price elasticity when we lower price from 35 cents to 30 cents? Well, let's plug this into an Excel formula to check it out. So our P1, there we go. We need to make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. Or I'm just going to move this over here. Our P1 is 0.35 and our Q1 is 6. Our P2 is 0.3 and our demand was 8. And so you can see what we have here is our Q1 minus Q2 is minus 2, right? That's going to be 6 minus 8. And our P1 minus P2 is 0.05 because that's 0.35 minus 0.3. And then we take the average quantity, which is 7, and our average price, which is 0.32.5, And then we put this all together in this formula. Simple change in Q divided by average Q, simple change in price over average price, and this is what we get, minus 1.857. So like I told you before, we take the absolute value, so we're just gonna drop the negative, and so the value of E is 1.86 when we round. Since this number is greater than 1, we say these customers are relatively sensitive to a change in price. So when you increase price a little bit, demand will drop by a greater proportion. And the same thing goes when you lower price. Now we can do the same type of calculation in the strategy simulation. So let me delete these numbers and start over. Let's go to the strategy simulation screen. And you could see here, for North America, for example, here is our P1, and we could use this as our Q1. And what we could do is we could change price, which will be our P2, and we could change it, and this will change to our Q2. Now, a couple notes here. When you use this to calculate price elasticity, make sure that you make a significant change in price. In other words, don't go from 45 to 45.50. Have at least a 20% change, and make sure that your change is away from the market average. So in other words, what I'm not going to do is go from 45 to 50. Notice how when I go from 45 to 50, that's around the market average. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start at 48. That's going to be my P1. And when I change this to P2, I'm going to increase it to 58. And notice how from 48 to 58 is away from the market average. So 48 is P1. This is Q1. So let's enter that in. That's 1346. I'm just going to copy that. So our Q1, our P1 is 48. And our Q1 is 1346. Now, let's change this to 58. That's our P2. And our Q2 is 815. So let me change this to 58. And you could see that our value for price elasticity is minus 2.6, or drop the minus sign is 2.6. Now that means our customers are sensitive to a change of price, but this number by itself is not going to do you much good. What you want to do is you want to do the exact same calculation for Europe, for Asia, and for Latin America, and then compare the numbers. Because what if their sensitivity is, let's say, minus 4.2. Let me just put 4.2. Now, remember how we said that this is sensitive because it's greater than 1? But in this case, the sensitivity is even greater than 2.6. It's 4.2. So this is also sensitive, but in comparison, this customer who's 2.6 is relatively less sensitive than this customer that's 4.2. So what I'm telling you is by itself, this number doesn't do any good. What you want to do is take the elasticity calculations in each region and then compare them. The customer in a region that has the greatest number is the most sensitive to that particular determinant of demand. Now, one other note is when you do these elasticity calculations, you have to do the exact same process in each region. For example, I went from 48 to 58. Well, in this case, I have to go from 48 to 58, and all of the other variables that you see here have to be exactly the same in order to make the elasticity calculations comparable. So make the exact same price change and have all of the other variables exactly the same. and then you could make a comparison in elasticities. Now, if I wanted to do this for, let me go back to 48. If I wanted to make this elasticity calculation for SQ, I would have a SQ1 and an SQ2. So my SQ1 also gives me a Q1. My SQ2 also gives me a Q2. And you would plug them in this formula, but instead of P1, P2, you have SQ1, SQ2, and you're going to interpret the numbers exactly the same way. So hopefully this is giving you some idea of how to use price elasticity in the simulation.